I never left the Philippines, mindset-wise. I was still operating under the Filipino way, as if I was surrounded with a bunch of Filipinos, when in fact I'm in an American setting. And the second thing I learned is that the Americans, they operate, they function under a different set of norms, something that is strange to me, and I need to learn what that is.
Welcome to the Sean Michael Afable Show. We're excited to talk with Benjamin Long, author, and we also have
Nate Calima
and
Rob Ruegseggger.
So we're just going to be talking about, Ben, your new book, which is called Cultural Adaptation, as well as your previous book, which is Hyphen Me. I loved both books. I read both of them, and I thought they were both fantastic. Really compelling. Hyphen Me was incredibly compelling, and this one was just really helpful to, actually for me, because, you know, being half Filipino, half American, it was just a really fun to kind of see the different nuances that I didn't even realize, you know, being from, you know, having two parents, one from one culture and one from another culture. It was definitely eye-opening. So thank you so much for being here, Ben.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so Rob's actually going to kick us off with a couple questions here. So
Ben, we've known each other for a few years, being family friends. But for those of us that our listeners who haven't met you, if you could just introduce yourself a little bit and tell us about your background.
yeah,
Sure. Hi, good evening. My name is Benjamin Long. I was born and raised in the Philippines, in Cebu, and I was raised in poverty, basically. I mean, third world kind of poverty, where, to put it in perspective, where it's a place where from the moment you wake up in the morning until the evening when you lay your head down to sleep, your whole energy throughout the day is spent towards finding your next meal. It's that basic. It's not about saving for a better house, vacation. It's about the next meal. And there's a certain mindset that comes with that, being at that low level. Now, for me to transfer from that point into the American corporate world, it's a big leap. And I couldn't have achieved that without having to deal with, first and foremost, cultural differences. And so basically that's what the book is all about, is to break it down, the nuts and bolts of what these so-called differences are and what kind of damage it can do in regards to your career and your social standing and basically life in general.
what would you say it was maybe the most difficult part of adapting to American culture coming from the Philippines?
Well, life in general is hard, as we all know. But as an immigrant, there's extra barriers that we face, as you know. One, of course, just to mention a few, is the language barrier. Right off the bat, that in and of itself is very challenging. And leaving everything behind, everything you love, everything you know, everything that you are, leaving that behind and take a shot at the unknown, that's a huge challenge. And then, of course, the other one is the isolation. Once you're in a place outside of your comfort zone, the isolation, and that's something that people really don't talk about. That's another challenge. And then and reinventing yourself in another country is a huge challenge. And then if that's not enough, as an immigrant, you still have to face the beast, which is cultural differences. And to me, that's the most challenging one because it's invisible. You can't feel it, you can't touch it, and therefore it's so easy to take that for granted. And to me, that was the most challenging one. I mean, of course, the rest of the things that I mentioned are equally as hard, but for example, the language barrier is straightforward. My English sucked. When I first arrived, I didn't speak in English. But at least I knew what my shortcomings were, and I knew where to get help. My parents could hire a tutor, or I could go to school. But with cultural differences, it's a little different, and it's not as forthcoming as it should be.
You grew up in Alumnos.
Oh, yes.
Where exactly is that?
That's in Cebu. It's a small, sleepy little fishing village in Cebu. Yeah. And as I mentioned, people there were very poor, but as a child, my responsibility was to keep my time occupied. And to that extent, I consider myself living in paradise because I had the Pacific Ocean in front of me, a lush meadow in my background, in my backyard, and plenty of playmates. 50, maybe 100
Wow.
kids my age,
Wow.
and we had all the time in the world. So from a child's perspective, even though we were starving, we had each other. And plus, the people, even though we were economically disadvantaged, people looked out for each other, and they were law-abiding, very respectful, and to that extent, they made up for what the place lacked economically. So I consider myself very fortunate.
I meant to ask this question later on, but I kind of want to jump right to it. What do you think? Do you think that that type of environment, what you grew up in, is as hard as it was? Would you say that there was a happiness there that maybe some people don't have, even if they are very well off?
Absolutely. The friendship that I gained there, I mean, it was just the warmth of pure, genuine friendship that I've not experienced since, and probably never will be. You know, it's just a genuine.
It's pure.
It's pure. It's pure relationship between two people.
You know, I think back when I was a kid, and I have moments where I think about the simplicity of it, just being in our backyard at our house, and all my cousins. And sometimes I get like a little bit emotional thinking about, you know, those times, as how simple it was with my cousins, and how free and happy we were riding our bikes or running around, playing tag, playing baseball, whatever it was. And there is something about that that's very nostalgic. And I remember I think it was Carl Jung. I think I heard this from must have been like Jordan Peterson talking about Carl Jung saying that, you know, we sacrifice, you know, as we start to age, you know, we get, you know, into our young adulthood, we kind of have to sacrifice that child within us at first to achieve the things that we want to achieve, and then after we've achieved those goals, then we can rediscover the child that we kind of left behind, or that we had within somehow. And I think that's I think back on those days.
Ben, what do you think that made your friendships in Alumnos so pure and genuine, and why do you think it's different here in your friendships?
Well, I have to also look at it from a perspective of a child, because as children, we really don't have anything worldly to offer, but ourselves, our friendship. You know, I mean, you attract people because they genuinely like you,
Sure.
not because of what you have or what you can offer or what you can do. So that's the genuine, you know, feelings that you get from a friendship. But as we grow up, of course, it's a little different, because each one of us have our own responsibilities, and for our family, to ourselves, and that always be in the forefront. And so any time that we bring people into our lives, it's always with the perspective of, you know, what can I get out of this friendship?
Sure.
Or what can they bring to my life, or what can I bring to their lives?
Mm-hmm.
So there's something attached to it, you know. But some of us are fortunate enough to, you know, keep those friendship from our childhood to stay in our lives throughout the duration of our lives. And I wish I had that, but you know, I mean, we as adults, we just go our own separate ways, and we get too busy with, you know, the rat race, and before you know it, we're using our cane and wonder where the time went.
So I guess you could say that your friendships as a child were disinterested, in the sense that you weren't trying to be friends with them to get anything from them, and the same was with them, with you.
I mean, just the pure joy of being in your company. That's it. And lose the time.
Maybe that's why Jesus says you have to be like a little child.
Perhaps, yes.
Well, I like what Aristotle, he talked about the 3 types of friendships. There was like the useful friendship, which was like, okay, if I'm a carpenter and that person is a supply store, maybe we have a useful friendship. We say hi, we talk to each other, but we get what we want from each other. So there's this utilitarian aspect of it. And then you have the, I can't remember the second one, but it's basically like, okay, we both like doing the same thing. I like basketball, you like basketball. I like baseball, you like baseball. I like to go to the bar, you like to go to the bar. Whatever it is, we enjoy this aspect because we enjoy each other because we enjoy the same things. And so it's kind of like, it's not utilitarian, it's more of circumstantial, I guess. And then there's a final type of friendship, which is a virtuous friendship, really wanting what's best for the other person just for their sake, because you actually care about them, who they are, and what they mean to you, as far as not what you get from them, but just because you've learned to care for that person beyond just the circumstantial or the utilitarian aspects of the friendship. So, yeah. Would you say that's something that you experience in alumnos?
Oh, absolutely.
That's cool. That's cool.
Do you think that type of friendship, as an adult, can be recreated, or do you think that is more of a cultural circumstance?
No, I mean, never say never. I think that can be recreated. You know, it really depends on the people you meet. You know, I've been fortunate enough to, come across with individuals such as yourselves who are genuine and have taken the time to get to know me and have taken the time to open up and allow me to, get to know them.
Sure.
Yeah. LA has a reputation of being shallow because of, being the entertainment
Closer you are to
capital in the
Hollywood,
world.
yeah.
Yeah.
But in reality, living here, I mean, there's always going to be those screws. But once you get to know people, and you learn that they're just like anywhere else. They have their ups and downs, and they have their needs just like you do. And but the crucial thing is that it just takes time for you to really get to know people and develop that.
Sure.
Do you find that there's more of a wall here in LA, in California, than, say, in the Philippines, as far as making friends or getting to that point where you actually feel more connected?
I think in general there's always this wall, but in due time I've experienced that the wall just melts down. Once you let the ego, put aside the ego and the need to be in a pedestal per se. Once you really get to know the person and you realize that you have far more in common than you have differences, then things gets more relaxed, and then you really get to enjoy each other's company.
Sure. So, Ben, what inspired you to write this book, and who do you think would benefit from reading it?
Well, the thing was that when I first arrived here, having been raised in the Philippines, I was under the impression, as most Filipinos do, that I was already Americanized, simply because of our long intertwined history with the United States. And I learned the hard way that, man, it's like day and night, And I wish back then someone would explain to me the so-called differences in a simple term that I could understand, I could follow. Knowing what I know now, it would have saved me a lot of sleepless nights and saved a lot of missed opportunities in my career. And so I wanted to always, in the back of my mind, I've always wanted to share that experience to empower other people like myself, to empower them to get over the hurdles that's holding them back. Okay? And so what I had in mind was to write a book. But then again, life happened, and I kind of put it in the back burner. And before you know it, years have rolled by, but the thought of sharing that experience was always in the back of my mind. And up until recently, not recently, but a few years back, it came back to me, and this time around I ran out of excuses as to not to write the book. And I finally sat down and just put it all on paper, and I'm finally glad that I did it. But the catalyst of that was what happened to me at work. Me and a buddy of mine were having lunch, and he said something that I thought was odd. He asked me, he goes, "Ben, how come Filipinos point with their lips?" And I thought, gee, I mean, what do you mean? I thought he was, I couldn't understand if he was trying to be insulting or just plain stupid, right? And I brushed up. I said, "Come on, dude. I mean, Filipinos don't point with their lip. You know, get out of here, you know." And as soon as I said that, this beautiful woman walked in the restaurant, and I noticed her. And I leaned over to my friend and I said, "Be discreet. Check her out." And he goes, "Where?" And I went, "There." And I caught myself pointing with my lips. And I said, "Oh my God, he's absolutely right." And of course, my friend didn't miss a beat. Because, "See, I told you so." And I thought it was just a fluke, right? So the next day, it just so happened that I have my weekly lunch with my parents. And so, as I always do, I walked into the door and said, "Oh, Mom, where's the food?" You know? And my mom did something odd that day. She didn't say a word. She just pointed to the kitchen with her lips. She just went, and I was like, I said, "Where's Dad?" And she did it again, pointing to the garage. and I thought that was the catalyst where I said, "Oh my God, my friend was absolutely right. How could I have missed something this obvious? And what have I been missing that I display that are considered strange in the Western world?" And so that kind of piqued my interest again about cultural differences, and from that point on, it just kind of snowballed into, this books.
So you started to become more self-aware.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then it just brought back to the old memory of like, okay, well, I got to share this experience, the hardship that I went through to initially help my Kababayans.
Sure.
And to your question, as far as who's the target audience, on the surface, it seems like it would be Filipino Americans is the primary target. But when you really read into the combined work, it actually applies to all immigrants from all walks of life.
Yeah.
And when you read into it further, it actually applies to native-born Americans, for example.
Mhm.
Because we now live in a world where you don't have to travel to some exotic places to meet someone from a different ethnic background. The people we work for, the people we work with, and the customers we serve are becoming more and more diverse, ethnically and racially. So from a native-born perspective, it is to your advantage to at least know what cultural buttons not to push. And of course, interracial couples, would benefit from it. Then you realize, you learn why your in-laws are so weird. I'm kidding, of course. and of course, TCKs.
Right.
It'll just put them in the perspective of the hardship that they're going through and the benefit in the long run that it has.
Yeah.
And it's good to know what you're going through and to see the big picture.
Yeah. I like the aspect that you were talking about, the difference between collectivist societies and individualist societies, and how America is much more of an individualist society, whereas the Philippines and a lot of other different countries are more collectivist. And I think that was actually really helpful to see the differences of how this culture is very much, it's very much, collectivist. It has a cultural identity, and I think that's the difference. Yeah, it seems like that's the difference between, somewhere like the Philippines and somewhere here like America or California. It's very diverse. There's a lot of different mindsets. It's very individualist, and it makes sense why you have the different issues that may arise when you move from one to another, from collectivist to individualist, or from individualist to collectivist.
I mean, that really was the challenge, because once I realized that there is such thing as cultural differences, but the issue itself is so broad and so deep that where do you even start, And so I thought the best place to start is really the cultural cores that lay as a foundation of all the cultures. And the studies from the scientific studies from the social scientists have concluded that the world is basically divided into two cultural cores, and that's where you have the collectivism, and then you have the individualist. In a nutshell, without giving so much away of the book, is that collectivism is the us mentality, is the group thing, is the belief that the strength of the many outweighs the good of any individual. And then, of course, you have the individualist, where it's about me. You know, it stems from how can I help others if I can't even help myself first, and everything else, and that's the foundation, and it dictates all the norms and the value system that you have. So in the book, I also wrote down the countries that are defined as or fall under those two constructs.
Right. Okay, so which would you say? I think I already know your answer. But which would you say is better, collectivist society or individualist society? Which one's better?
Well, the thing is that what I've learned from my experience is that cultural differences is neither good or bad. They're just different. And just because something doesn't work for me, it doesn't mean that it's not going to work for someone else. You know, different is not necessarily bad. Different with a purpose is good. Different makes you hungry. Different inspires. And again, different with a purpose, to me, is good.
When it comes to identity, do you think that there's a lack of identity within individualist societies? So people don't have a sense of who they are, who they're supposed to be, in contrast with collectivist societies?
I'm going to go in tangent in
Sure, yeah.
in answering that.
Yeah.
One of the characteristic of the Americans that really blew me away when I first moved here was their ability to say, Rob, I disagree with you, and here's the reason why. And they say it like it's normal, casually, cool and collected, right? That blows me away, because where I'm from, I couldn't do it, you know.
Can you do it now?
Of course I can. I mean, in the beginning, yeah. I mean, I just had a hard time.
Do you like it, or are you still kind of like hesitant?
Well, the thing was that I didn't realize that I was looking at it from the prism of a collectivist, from a world where we don't openly express our unfiltered opinion about something. Now, from from an individualist point of view, it's a world where there's no vagueness in terms of what you want, and from the get-go, you are conditioned to always express what it is that you want. There's no vagueness there. So when you have a conversation with an American, you have no doubt where they stand on a certain issue. I come from a world where not to make waves, always be respectful, and always obey authorities. The American individualist is you always question authorities. And it starts from home, where you start with your parents. And your parents encourage that in you. I mean, in the countless hours that I've spent with my American friends having dinner with them, it's amazing how much lessons can be passed on in the span of a meal. You know, where they teach their children that if you have a question, ask. If you have any doubt, ask. And if someone challenges your point of view, defend it. But you got to be open. And as they get older, they also encourage them to find things out on their own and not to take anybody's word for it. And when they make a point, they will give them a pat in the back, you know. So from the get-go, an American child learned that his opinion matters. Contrast that to a collectivist society like where I'm from, where from the very beginning you are, or I was, conditioned never to be disrespectful to authorities. You do not answer back. Okay? If my mom were to say, pass me the green rice, I know the rice is green, but out of respect, And then it's carried on to other authority figures, like in school, where teachers talk, good students listen. And if you were listening attentively, you wouldn't have any questions, right? Now, if you have been conditioned to always obey all your life and respect authorities, are you supposed to wake up as an adult one day and feel comfortable questioning authorities? Of course not, you know? Chances are you won't. Well, the Americans, it's ingrained in them. So as they grow up, they have no question. I mean, they have no problem questioning any authority figures. And when I first got here, excuse me, when I first arrived here, I went to a Catholic school, and I was blown away when I saw students debating with a teacher who happens to be nuns, you know? And I was like, my God, these guys are evil. And I did realize that it was just the individualist ways. And there are, but once you get into it, there are good sides on both ends. But when you're wrapped up into your own culture, it's always hard to see the disadvantage of your own culture, because you have this built-in bias that, you know, the ethnocentric that we have about our own culture, and especially when it's challenged. Sure. Then the instinctive part is for you to, you know, clamp in and protect it with everything, and then you find the flaws of the other one. The other culture is just trying to invade your comfort zone. Yeah. And I went through all the gamut, and I think, I'm sorry to be so lengthy, but no. But I think the most difficult part of assimilating was to realize that the biggest hurdle in front of me was me.
That's very humble. You know, it's hard to do that. It's hard to say that I need to change. You know, oftentimes we want to point out and say, oh, this has got to change, or this is not good, I don't like this, but really, we're usually the issue.
Yes. And the problem was, as I alluded to earlier, is that cultural differences is invisible. You can't touch it, you can't feel it. And it makes it so easy for us to take that for granted. And the culture that I'm used to is embedded in me. And when I found myself outside of that comfort zone, it's a scary place, man, you know, and especially when everything that I thought was right, the value system that I had, is now questioned, and I see people around me doing exactly the opposite of what was good, you know, like respecting authorities. And they're like talking back to them, and you're kind of like, dude, come on, you know? And my instinctive reaction was to change them rather than change myself. And looking back, it was because I feared change. You know, because when it got to a point where I realized, okay, cultural differences exist, but it's not me that needs to change, because the Filipino ways is much better than the American ways. So it's they, not I, who needs to change. And I was crazy enough to really try to make that happen. You know?
Can I ask you your feeling on that, though? Do you feel that, regardless of, you know, the having to change part, and I totally agree, like, you have to adapt to culture, like I loved your chapter, you know, when in Rome, you know, do as the Romans do, right? So, given that fact, though, do you feel like Filipino culture is better than American culture in some aspects?
In some aspect, and vice versa.
Okay.
It's I think it was Rob who said it depends on the situation. Situational. There are times, okay? There are times that it's best to have a collectivist approach in a situation. Mm-hmm. There are times when individualist approach is appropriate. And that's what gives TCKs and Hyphen Me's the edge, because they know that, you know, they have the flexibility, they have the foresight to be able to be nimble in this situation.
Yeah.
So what would your advice be to someone who's newly immigrated to another country and they're having difficulty fitting in? Should they just abandon the culture that they were brought up in favor of the new culture, or how should they deal with the challenges that they're encountering?
Well, first and foremost, pick up my book. That's the absolute.
Right here. Cultural Adaptation. Actually, right here. This is good right here, I think, because I can see.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you should never leave home without it.
I love it. That's a good line. There you go. Cultural Adaptation.
Cultural adaptation made easy. Don't leave home without it. But
And where can they get the book?
oh, Amazon right now.
Perfect.
And it comes in ebook version and also print. And I'm working on the audio version of it as well.
Nice. Are you doing your own audio? You kind of reading it?
Well, this guy has a beautiful voice. He's very eloquent, so I
You could have Nate do it because he's like
Yes.
an announcer. And then.
We'll do it in a sensual, romantic way.
Oh,
Yes.
wow.
So I adapted my culture.
Nate, you always have to take it and twist it to.
That's my contribution to this whole conversation.
Oh,
No,
well,
actually, I have a question for Nate. Because in one of the chapters, you mentioned how titles are really important, and so Nate, I remember you saying that one of the first times you actually had a white girlfriend, and you met her parents for the first time.
Oh.
For the first time, can you tell us the story?
Okay, well,
Wanna get your-
the thing is, I grew up here. I was born here, and I grew up Mormon. So growing up LDS, everyone's brother or sister, or
Nice.
Mister, Mrs., not Tom or Bill. so yeah, first time I dated a white girl, and I met her dad for the first time, and then I went up to him and I realized I had no idea what to call him. And I was like, "Hello, sir." Like, you don't call him Pete though.
Because he's
You call him Uncle. What the hell do I call your dad? So yeah, eventually he tried to call. He wanted me to call him by his first name for the longest time, and it became his little thing. Get Nate to call him first time, and I'm like, call me Jerry, and I'm like, okay, sir.
that's funny because when I first arrived here, my best friend in 8th grade introduced me to his father, Jim Smurber. And I said, "Hello, Mr. Smurber." And he says, "Oh, Ben, please don't call me Mr. It makes me feel so old. Call me Jim." And I had such a problem with it, Nate, because it's so disrespectful where I'm from. I mean, apparently he's much older than me, and I just couldn't do it.
Yeah.
So but at the same time, I did not want to offend him. So consequently, what I did, I avoided him whenever I go visit my friend. I just avoided him. And in rare occasion where I run into him, as a compromise, I would just mumble his name, Hyam, because I couldn't just outright say Jim. It was just so disrespectful, So that was weird, yeah.
Yeah, I could never do it for him. For other people, I can do it now, but if it's my girlfriend's dad, I probably would never do that.
But I always wonder why that is. But my conclusion is that it's just the Americans need to, I guess, stay young at heart. They just funny now when people call me sir. I kind of like, oh dude, please don't call me sir. It makes me feel old. Come on now.
So you've kind of
So you're
assimilated that
kind of,
mindset.
Yes. I mean, I guess that would be one gauge to see how well you've assimilated. Yeah.
So, would you identify now as more Filipino or American?
As a hyphen me, if I have to quantify it, I would have to say I'm 75% American and 25% Filipino.
Okay.
Even if I try, to completely forget where I'm from, it'll never happen. There will be a portion of me that will always remain Filipino, and that's not a bad thing, because that's a useful part of who I am. I feel comfortable within my own skin today, and it has a lot to do with that culture.
You said you're 75% American. And
If I have to
20
quantify it, yeah.
25% Filipino now. Is it a choice how much you assimilate? Are you conscious of how much you become Americanized, or is it just inevitable that we will assimilate?
That has a lot to do more with my surrounding.
Sure.
It's just that I spent a lot of my time away from the Filipino community.
Mhm.
Like when I first arrived here, there was hardly any Filipinos in Fontana. I think there was one family that was Filipino, and the rest were just white. And then when I joined the service for 10 years, I was far away from any Filipino influence. So that's where I really noticed the cultural difference when you're in a mainstream American culture, and so out of necessity, I had to really focus on adapting to their ways, because after all, I am in their territory, right? It's not. I learned the hard way that it's not them coming to me. It's me adapting to their ways, and if they were to move to the Philippines, it would be the reverse, right?
Well, that's a good question. So, here's the interesting thing.
Mm-hmm.
All three of us are actually wanting to move to the Philippines, and there's probably a few different reasons for that, but we just really love being there. There's a lot of different things about the culture, about what we're doing with our lives, the different businesses and entertainment and whatnot. What would you say would be some of the pitfalls that we might fall into as Filipino Americans who have had some experience with our own families, but maybe haven't been fully, completely immersed in Filipino culture? I mean, I've lived there for a few months, but some things were still sort of a little confusing of how should I handle this, what should I call somebody, the titles and whatnot. What do you think are some of the biggest pitfalls that we might run into?
Well, the thing is that first and foremost, thank you for making that decision, because our country could really use talents like you guys. Infuse your innovations out there and new ideas, and propel our country to rise above.
I hope we can contribute greatly to
Yes,
society
yes.
in some way.
Yeah, and
We will.
yeah,
That's the American. We
Yeah,
will.
there's definitely the part of America we want to make a difference. We want to do something.
and if
Yeah.
anything else, with our Kababayans, I mean, they're hardworking people. Like everything else, they just want an opportunity to prove themselves. Our biggest import, by the way, from what I understand, is labor.
Yes.
So people that are college graduates, people that are hungry, people that are motivated, are leaving in droves, and who benefits from that? Other countries. And it's great when you have the reverse, where talented people like yourselves are going back and making a difference there. So thank you.
Thanks. Well,
So-
I'm excited. Very excited.
So, but as far as going back, I mean, it's just, of course, then get to know the collectivist ways, and just keep in mind that it is their rules, and you have to respect that.
Mhm.
In terms of titles, that's where it applies. You can't call anybody by their first name, where it's normal to us. To them, it means a lot, and especially people of authority. For example, with authority figures, their accomplishment in the past counts a lot, and that renders respect. Over here in the United States, yes, what you did in the past counts, but what can you do for me today?
Yeah.
You still get a,
Interesting.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
And so that's why we don't, as Americans, it's not, we don't rely so much on our past accomplishments. It's what we can bring into the table now that matters.
Yeah, there's a saying in different industries, you're only as good as your last project.
Exactly, and that's the individualist way. And it's not by accident that the United States remains the most powerful country in the world economically, and it has to do with our innovations to always bring new ideas to the table, and hard work, and always find ways to make things work, and
Yeah.
adapt to changes.
Yep.
And I think in the United States, I think that's one of their biggest edge over the rest of the world, is their adaptability to change. I mean, typically we've already identified and already applied what we can do to upcoming changes. We're always the innovator. And that has to do with our background, with with being what do you call that? The words I'm looking for.
Entrepreneurs, or
no,
a background of.
The melting pot. That we
Oh,
are.
okay,
yeah.
yeah.
And we have a lot of practice. That's why we're used to that, as opposed to a homogenous society where
Right.
they're used to just one way of thinking,
Yeah.
Okay.
and then change hit them, and they're kind of like, oh, what happened?
What about in business? So, we're looking at possibly starting some different, well, we are starting some different businesses here as well as in the Philippines. I've heard that there's certain ways of operating that aren't the same as the U.S. What might we run into as far as moving there, or what might somebody from the Philippines coming here encounter that's different from the Philippines?
I have not had practical experience in international business per se, because my business is local.
Okay, yeah.
But from what I can recall, from what I read, and from what I experienced with other people who have tried, specifically in the Philippines,
Yeah.
one of the biggest problems that they have is just the communication channel.
Mm-hmm.
From an American point of view, if you're expecting to do business like you would here, it's going to be a challenge, because they just have different ways of doing things.
Mm-hmm.
Like recently, a couple who went to Manila wanted to start a business, and just to get straight answers to simple questions, from their eyes, they were having a hard time getting it.
Mm-hmm.
So for you guys, it's important to really get to know the locals and ask questions. Always ask, how do we do things here? I'm new, and I'd like to learn your ways, and how can I approach this better to have a better result?
Would you say that's something that helped you as well, like moving here and doing business here, is that asking those questions and really being open-minded in that regard to figuring out the system?
Eventually, yes, but getting
Okay.
to that level, it was pretty hard. Good thing that you asked that, because part of the hurdles that I faced in the corporate America was just that, communication. I had such a hard time expressing how I really feel and what I really wanted. And that was because of my background of keeping things to yourself and respect authorities. So when I was in banking, for example, Americans are really big into brainstorming about what can we do, what's the situation here and how can we remedy it.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone is expected to pitch in. And this is an open forum setting. Now, for someone like me who are coming from don't express your opinion openly, that's an intimidating environment. So always when it was my turn to talk, I would force myself, and I was always sugarcoating it, because I didn't want to offend people.
Mm-hmm.
And my boss, much to his credit, picked up on it and pulled me aside and said to me, well, then I noticed that you really don't have that much to say during the meeting. And in the rare occasion that you do have something to say, you're always sugarcoating it. Because Ben, what I want from you is tell me what I need to do, what I need to know, not what you think I want to hear. Because you are, as a sales rep, you are my eyes and ears for what's going on over there.
Mm-hmm.
It is okay in this environment to tell me exactly what I need to know. And so he was culturally savvy, and I think he picked up on it. And so that was a situation where there was a turning point where I said, yes, I need to try harder. Yeah.
That seems like pretty logical. If you're part of a group, and you're asking for those opinions and whatnot, it's important to, if you have an idea, to interject, contribute in that way.
From an American perspective, it's natural.
Yeah.
But from coming from a collectivist view, it's not that easy. When you come from a conditioning of do not offend people, or when you're all your life you're not trained to speak how you really feel and what you really wanted, expressing that. And if you made a lifelong habit of it, it's like they say, habits are hard to break.
Right.
And
It's not even part of your paradigm. Maybe.
No, and when you find yourself suddenly, I was stuttering and But luckily, they were very supportive, and we were cheering them. Well, go Ben, go Ben.
That's cool. That's really cool that you had a good group of people who actually supported you and that understood and actually encouraged you that way.
I don't know the significance of number 21. They say that habit is hard to break, but they said if you repeat something 21 times, it becomes a habit. And as you know, habit is hard to break. You know.
Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah, you have to do it 21 times. Yeah, I've heard that before too.
But there was another turning point to another example of cultural differences that I'd like to share. Again, in the work setting, one time my boss says to me, I don't know, for whatever reason, he said to me, Ben, why don't you do your own performance evaluation? And I thought, that's strange. For an American, that would have been an easy call. I would give myself a 20 out of 10, right? That's an American way, yeah.
22.
But I had such a hard time with it. I could not understand why I couldn't get myself to give myself a high rating. In fact, it bothered me to such an extent that in the end, I gave myself a rating of 2 out of 5. My mindset was that, okay, my boss is going to read this, he's going to totally disagree with it, and he himself will make the changes, and I'll be fine with it. What happened in reality, of course, is that he didn't even read it, dude. He just signed it and gave it to the big boss, right? A month later, I'm in front of the big boss trying to negotiate a pay raise. And dude, he just looked at me like, are you crazy, Ben? I mean, he goes, Ben, your last performance evaluation, I was not impressed. In fact, I have a copy of it right here, and waved it in my face. Did I feel like an idiot? Absolutely. But I learned 2 things that day. One, I was wondering, it's like, why did I sabotage my own performance evaluation? What I've learned was that I never left the Philippines, mindset-wise. I was still operating under the Filipino way, as if I was surrounded with a bunch of Filipinos, when in fact, I'm in an American setting. And the second thing I learned is that the Americans, they operate, they function under a different set of norms, something that is strange to me, and I need to learn what that is, and that's where individualism came in.
Okay. So were you basically highlighting all of your weaknesses and shortcomings in your performance evaluation?
I was trying to be humble. I thought because humbleness, where we're from, is, is a virtue. You know, and to me, touting your own horn is really bad. And I thought I kind of like connected that with giving yourself a high praise.
Yeah.
And that's why my hope was that he himself would review it and have a meeting with me and change it for me. But it never happened. It's like, oh man.
So how are your performance evaluations?
Oh dude,
now?
if I'm given another chance like that, out of 5, I'll give myself 100. I'm not taking any chances. Gladly, hey, I'm a legend here. And wouldn't even blink,
Nice.
As a matter of fact, I was asked one time, this friend of mine goes, can you dance salsa? And without even thinking about it, dude, I just blurted out. I said, well, in the salsa world, I'm a legend.
Do you dance salsa?
Of course it's a lie.
Oh no.
Would you say that there are aspects of an individualist culture that a collectivist culture could learn from, and vice versa? Are there aspects of an individualist culture that could be improved by something from a collectivist culture?
Absolutely, man. That's why my experience have taught me that the misconception is that the word assimilation is a double-edged sword to some people, because to them they look at it as a zero-sum game. Is that if I adapt to the American culture, that would be at the expense of losing my, for example, Filipino identity. But if you look at it that way, of course, that's horrifying. Who wants to lose your identity, right? Mm-hmm. But what I've learned when I assimilated is exactly the opposite. The values that I hold dear and my old culture are intact. Like I said, even if I want to completely eliminate my past, I couldn't, because it's embedded in me. Now, what I've learned is that once I've adapted to another culture, in my cultural box, not only that I have the collectivism, I now also have an individualism. So now I have two. As I went along, now I actually have three. And that's the third culture,
Yeah.
which is, when here's the collectivist, and then here's the individualist. And that gap, or that overlap in between, that's the third culture. And that is a good position to be in, because then it gives you're in a position to take advantage of the strength of both culture at your disposal, and at the same time have the wherewithal, the awareness of the weaknesses that both cultures possess. And you can skate around it, or avoid it, or work around it. That's something that a monocultural person would not have the perspective to be able to see. And TCKs, Hyphen Me's, they have that ability.
I was thinking earlier that if I were able to construct a hybrid culture,
That's it. That's another word for it.
yeah, I think it would be one that had the rights, the individual rights of an individualist society with the heart and moral compass of a collectivist society. Would you agree with that, or would you modify anything about that?
Well, yes. I mean, I agree with that. I mean, one thing about life is that it will always have opportunity for you to apply those, because situations change all the time. I mean, we live in a world where it's constantly evolving, constantly changing, constantly reinventing itself. So a one approach to everything is not enough.
Yeah.
Because life itself is so unpredictable, and so to have one tools in your toolbox, it's not going to be enough. Now to have three, that's a different story.
Yeah.
and us, you have the potential. But again, also, as I alluded to before, the biggest challenge I had is to realize that I was the problem, and that has to do with my mindset, and it's natural. Some people call it human nature. It's actually, and some people call it confirmation bias. And that's a big issue, and I really want to hammer on that, because confirmation bias is the idea that, they say that from the moment you wake up in the morning, your mind subconsciously is already actively searching for evidence to support what you already believe in. And it's so embedded in you that you don't even think about it. Now, what you plant in your head to be the truth is irrelevant whether it's right or wrong. It's what you tell your mind. And so if and I think in my case, when I planted in my mind that my original culture is the best, guess what? My mind is so active looking for it. It'll look for evidence that yes, every day is being confirmed. Yes, you're absolutely right. Yes, the world is exactly how you see it.
Now, is that confirmation bias there sort of as a survival mechanism? Like, okay, if I wake up and all of a sudden, okay, that moved, something's going on here. It's sort of like makes you aware that there's something wrong here that shouldn't be here, and it's sort of that survival mechanism to point out that this is not what I'm used to, this is bad, I've been living this way, I've been surviving this way, this is something new. And maybe that's why we're afraid to often, we're afraid of change, because we're very deep within our psychology. Change might mean risk, might mean danger, might be instability, stuff like that.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's like you said, it's our protective mechanism, and it serves its purpose. It has its purpose. But the thing is that to just be cognizant that it could take it the opposite way, where when you latch on to a certain belief, and it makes you close-minded to a point where you're not open to suggestions, you're not open to new ideas,
Right.
new solutions. Then it becomes a problem.
Cognitive dissonance is the word that
That's
comes
another
to,
word,
is
yeah,
the
yes,
term that
yes,
comes to my
uh-huh.
mind. Yeah.
And in my case, that was the biggest thing, because the mind is so strong, man. Once you tell it what to look for, it does just that, you know. It asks no questions. It just does it, you know. And for me to really identify and realize it, and then start the process of altering that mindset, you know, it was really hard. Otherwise, I'd still be in my little niche corner selling flip-flops, you know?
Yeah. But you've done a great job. I mean, I see you've, you know, everything I read in your books, I mean, the stories you went through, the things you went through, unbelievable stories. I mean, the little bits that we talked about tonight, that we mentioned here tonight, I mean, just they don't scratch the surface of what your life has been about and like. It's incredible to see, you know, where you started as a kid in Alumnos and where you are now, and it's an incredible story. I have to tell everybody, you have to go read Hyphen Me. You have to read Cultural Adaptation. They're fantastic books.
We should interview him again about Hyphen Me.
We definitely should. We definitely will do another interview. But I do have one last question. So,
Well, thank you, Sean. That's very generous of you.
yeah,
No, that means a lot.
yeah.
Thank you.
Well, the last sort of question I had was like, you know, as far as like dating in the Philippines, how does it differ from dating here in the U.S.? and what's the pitfalls? What should you look out for? What's the bottom line?
We only have 2 hours here.
Well, the thing is that, you know, I mean, from a perspective of, as far as dating perspective, there's two school of thoughts in my mind. Looking at it from your point of view, you're like in your prime of the dating world, as opposed to someone that is not so prime in their dating world like myself. There's a different perspective. Like, for example, in my case, I learned that as we get older, as I get older, the potential pool of candidates gets narrower and narrower. And if I'm fortunate enough to find someone that I'm interested in, chances are they're already taken, or they're just not interested. And vice versa, those individuals who find me, who are interested in me, I just don't feel the same way. And so as you get older, it gets narrower. In your case, you're at the prime, the grass is never greener, you know? So it's a little different perspective. But one thing I can say is that is one of the most important decisions you'll ever make, is to have your second, your better half. Because when life throws you a punch, okay, and really aim to hurt you, that's when you find yourself challenged to the core, where you summon yourself with everything that you have just to make it to another day, you know. And when you're fortunate enough to have that better half on your side, dude, that's priceless. And that's something that requires really substance. Men in general are visual.
Yeah.
Women are metaphysical. You know, they have this idea of prince that no mortal man could ever meet.
Well,
Well, of course.
I'm like a 20 out of 10. Self-evaluate.
A 100 out of 5.
With the exception of my friend Nate. But then
no
again,
one's matching with me.
well,
like the red.
he does have a point there, because myself, I'm a perfect catch. You know, I'm educated, sophisticated, rich, available, and
You have a 12
legendary in bed. So
That's another video we're going to be doing.
Not to mention you have a 12-pack.
just by looking at me, you could never tell that I'm a man of substance. No, I'm being silly totally.
I was going to say steel.
But no, my point really is that substance is not something that you can pick up just by a mere glance. You know, it's something that you really need to invest time in to really get to know a person. You know, to really appreciate the substance, because substance is what matter. And when it comes to the gut punch that life will inevitably deliver to you, that person is so important.
And how do you find that person? Like, whether it's a guy looking for that person in his life, or a woman looking for that person in her life.
The first move would be to buy my book, and it will tell you the answer.
That's my problem. Didn't buy the book.
You're good. Your answer on that is just as good as mine. I'm still searching too myself.
There you go. That's The Answers of Life. No, it's actually it's a great book, honestly. Cultural Adaptation.
One last question for you. If there was one thing that you could change about American culture, and if there's one thing you could change about Filipino culture, what would it be?
I wouldn't change anything.
Nothing.
No, not a thing.
Okay.
Well, with that, we're going to end this talk. Thank you guys so much for watching. This has been an awesome pleasure to have Ben and Nate and Rob here on the show. If you guys have any questions or comments, leave it down below. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and we will see you in the next one.